Hello, psychology folks. Hope everybody had a good weekend and looking forward to Thanksgiving, which won't be too far next week. So we can get through this week. We'll have a little bit of a break. Obviously, we won't meet during that Thanksgiving weekend. We will have a video lecture that week. Speaking of video lectures, I've posted everybody's grades for the past test, and this is again a good opportunity to go onto Blackboard, look at your grades, and see if anything is missing. And if anything is missing, go ahead and make it up while you can and while you have time. I did note that there was one video lecture that very few people seem to have replied to, and it was that added lecture on that Friday that we did not have class. That was the video lecture for October 27th, and so you might see that listed as persuasion, a persuasion assignment on your grade list. That's the reply to the video lecture from 1027. So if you've not done that, make sure you get on Blackboard, watch the lecture if you haven't watched it, and post your reply about persuasion. That was the question that was posed in that video lecture. And then if you have any other gaps, again, good opportunity to go in and take care of those, because while the tests are important, participating online, since this is a hybrid class, is equally as important, and you can't pass the class without both, as I'm sure all of you watching me now are aware. All right, so getting back to personality, we talked a little bit about personality in the last video lecture, just going over that briefly. Personality, remember, a pattern of enduring, distinctive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that characterize the way an individual adapts to the world. We talked about the psychodynamic perspective, which emphasizes that personality is primarily unconscious. It comes from outside our awareness, from that boiler room in our unconscious. We talked about Freud and how he came to this conclusion and came up with this iceberg explanation of personality. The ego, which is part of what just barely peeks over the surface, the superego, which is morality, and the id, which is that where all of this pressure comes from. And the superego tries to manage the id. The ego tries to make the id match reality. In other words, make this boiler room of I want to do what I want to do, follow the rules, so that what emerges above the water, the personality that everybody sees, is something that conforms to what society requires us to conform to. And we don't need to go through that again. We saw the video. Karen Horney, sociocultural influences must be considered. She did not believe in just the unconscious pressure, but that it was the need for security, and that we needed to look at the cultural environment to determine why people's personalities are what they are. Carl Jung believed that the personality was associated with the beginning of human existence, and he's sort of joined Freud in this idea that our unconscious minds, our unconscious personalities communicate with each other in a way that we're not aware of. So, while we're in class, through all kind of body language and all, the way we say what we say, he would say that our personalities are somehow, our not our personalities, but our unconscious beings are somehow communicating with each other. And through that we have this collective unconscious, which gives rise to these archetypes, these sort of universal images, the anima, the animus, the persona. Anyway, we went through over that last week. That list is in your textbook. Alfred Adler developed individual psychology that were motivated by purpose and goals to compensate for a weakness, and he was the originator of the whole birth order movement, talking about how your personality can be dependent on when you were born. So the core principles of the psychodynamic perspective: personality is determined by current experiences and early life, and it can better be understood by examining it developmentally, how it develops, and we mentally transform our experiences. In other words, what we experience becomes who we are, and that it's not all conscious. There are unconscious motives. Humanistic, stressing a person's capacity for personal growth and positive human qualities. In other words, we control our lives to achieve our desires and goals. Maslow talked about that self-actualization, the goal of reaching this, the ultimate person of morality, creativity, and that we're all trying to meet all these needs so that we can ultimately become this perfect person. Of course, that doesn't explain the people whose needs are met, yet they don't become this perfect, moral, creative, spontaneously problem-solving person. They become something bad. And so clearly there is something else at work besides this drive for self-actualization. Also, Carl Rogers believed that we struggle to understand our unhappiness, that we're all born with the raw ingredients to have a happy life. We just need the right conditions. And Rogers believed those conditions were unconditional positive regard. You are accepted regardless, and that leads us to achieve ultimate happiness. That when conditions are put on us, conditions of worth, as they're called, we get unhappy, and that in order to achieve happiness, we need to have respect, comfort, and love. We need to be genuine and open with our feelings. Alright, that's the assignment from last time. Alright, a new perspective on personality. Trait perspectives. Trait perspectives is the approach that personality consists of broad and enduring dispositions or traits that tend to lead to a characteristic response. In other words, we all have certain traits, and if you have these traits, you will respond in a particular way to your situation. Gordon Allport is one of the fathers of trait perspectives, and Allport believed that to understand healthy people, you needed to focus on their lives in the present, not their childhood experiences. So the opposite of psychodynamic, the psychodynamic perspective and Freud. Allport believed you need to focus on the now. He took an approach that involved trying to come up with all the different words that existed in the English language that could describe a person. Words like happy, sad, angry, and he came up with about 4,500 words that the English language uses to describe how a person feels, behaves, etc. And they took those words and they distilled them down into 5 personality dimensions. In other words, they determined you could take those 4,500 words and separate them into 5 categories where they were mostly the same. And that became the 5-factor model of personality. In other words, we have 5 broad personality dimensions through which we describe how people are, what their personality is. And those 5 dimensions are openness, that's being curious, original, intellectual, creative, and open to new ideas. So this trait, openness, you would be described as to how open or not open you are. So these traits run from, a whole, this is very much you, to this is very much not you. So think of that in a continuum. Another trait, conscientiousness, the degree to which you are organized, systematic, punctual, oriented toward achievement, and dependable. And of course, people who are very, very much this, and maybe not so much. Extroversion, the extent to which you are outgoing, talkative, sociable, that you enjoy being in social situations. And of course, if you are way on the low end of extroversion, you would be an introvert. So introversion and extroversion both contained in that trait. And agreeableness, the extent to which you are agreeable, affable, tolerant, sensitive, trusting, kind, and warm. And then the final 5th trait, neuroticism, the degree to which you may be anxious, irritable, temperamental, and moody. That's the 5-factor model of personality. And so if you were to take a personality test based on the 5-factor model, and there are some that you can take, the test would ask questions to measure where you fell on the scale of these different traits. And that's how they would determine the type of personality that you have. Henry Murray came up with the perspective of the personological approach. The personological approach, and again, we're still talking about personality here. The personological approach is the history. His quote is, "The history of the organism is the organism." He believed in unconscious motivation. That sounds similar to Freud, and that our motives are unknown to us. So you just can't ask people what they want to measure motivation. Murray was didn't agree with the idea that you could give these personality tests and evaluate people's personalities. He believed that their personal motivations were not something that you could that you could bring to mind immediately, not something that you were consciously aware of. And so, based on Murray's personological approach, they came up with something called the thematic apperception test. The thematic apperception test, which involved looking at pictures. Seems fairly simple. I should probably back up for a second here and make sure that I'm clear that in talking about the five-factor model of personality, we're talking about the trait perspective. And so we have talked about so far the psychodynamic perspective. We have talked about the humanistic perspective. We've talked about the trait perspective. And now we are talking about the personological perspective. So we've moved into a new perspective here with the personological approach. The idea that there is unconscious motivation in who we are, and you can't just ask us to answer questions to determine what kind of person we are. You've got to get below the surface. Again, it sounds a little bit like psychodynamic and like Freud. And so based on this idea, the thematic apperception test was created, and it involves, as we said, looking at pictures. So the psychologist would show you a picture, for example, this picture, and they would say, "Tell me the story of this picture." Now, if you looked at that picture and you said the little girl is being rewarded for being so good and cleaning her room, or the little girl is being told by her mother how much her mother loves her, or something positive like that, that's going to give the psychologist a sense of what your childhood perhaps was like. If you were to look at this picture and say, the little girl's getting in trouble, she's being scolded, she's done something bad, or something like that, that's also going to give the psychologist a sense of where you're coming from. The idea is that the pictures are neutral, and when you apply a story to that picture, you're going to pull your own experience into that picture, and the story that you give to this neutral picture will tell the psychologist something about what's going on in your unconscious, because you're not going to be aware of what he's doing, but the story that you pull is kind of, again, it kind of sounds a little bit like Freud and psychodynamic, that you're pulling clues about what's going on in the unconscious. Here, another example of the pictures that are used in the thematic apperception test. And so you can see, think about the different interpretations that you would give this picture if somebody asked you to tell a story, or this picture. Would this be a positive or a negative story, or this picture? And the story you would tell would give the psychologist some sense of what's going on in your mind and what's in your background that might relate to whatever personality behaviors that they're dealing with. Another aspect of the personological approach is the life story approach. The life story approach was developed by a gentleman named Dan McAdams. And Dan McAdams says that our life stories are our identities. That it's our life story representing our memories. Remember, we talked about how much Our memories are tied up in who we are and our consciousness and our personality. Our life story represents the memories of what makes us who we are. And he believed that the intimacy motive, in other words, an enduring concern or a need for warm personal encounters, drives us to be who we are. Next, we have social cognitive perspectives. Social cognitive perspectives. Now, if you remember our discussion about the cognitive approach, went too far forward on the slide here. 1 second. Let's get back to where we need to be. If you remember our discussion about the cognitive approach to psychology, the cognitive approach involves thinking. The fact that we're not driven by these unconscious needs and desires and things that are in our past that we have no knowledge of or don't realize, that somehow make us do things but we don't know why. The social cognitive perspective emphasizes conscious awareness. Not our beliefs. How about our beliefs? Our beliefs, our expectations, our goals, our ability to reason. We can think about our past, our present, and our future, and we can think about ourselves. And in that cognitive activity in our thinking, that drives who we are in our personality. Albert Bandura is the father of social cognitive theory, and in a sense, it is based on somewhat on behaviorism. The idea that we are motivated to be a certain way based on how we're conditioned by our environment. But it also includes a mental process, that behavior, environment, and personal cognitive, in other words, thinking factors, are all important in understanding personality. And this is Bandura's social cognitive theory, and it's sort of a triangular theory, that there are personal factors, biological events, things that happen to us. There are environmental factors, the people around us, the environment around us, and our behavior, and that they're all linked together, so that personal factors, our intelligence, etc., affect our behavior. But environmental factors affect our personal factors, which affects behavior. Behavior affects the environment because our behavior can change the environment around us. The environment affects our behavior, and so everything is sort of all tied together and linked together, and that's social cognitive theory. And it sounds really complicated, and it is. In a sense, what Bandura is saying is that we're constantly involved in this ongoing interaction with our environment, ourselves, and our behavior. And all of this tied together is how we approach the world. Again, it kind of takes me back to the original father of psychology, William James, talking about being in that stream of consciousness, that we're constantly trying to deal with what the world is handing out to us. And in a sense, that's Bandura's social cognitive theory, that we're constantly involved in this interplay with all of these different factors together. Social cognitive theory involves observational learning, because obviously, as you're watching behavior, looking at the environment, watching other people, etc., you're going to be learning through what you see. Personal control, you do have control over how you act, and also self-efficacy, the idea that I have the ability, I have the skills, I have the confidence to play a role in who I am. That's all the social cognitive perspective of personality. And then we have the biological perspective. The biological perspective of personality, interestingly enough, goes all the way back to Hippocrates. And Hippocrates believed that our psychology, our personality was affected by the balance of fluids in our body. Because you think way back then, obviously they couldn't I didn't know about nerves and nerve impulses and memory and brain. What they could do is when they cut you open, lots of fluid leaked out, and so they believed that this fluid was what caused your personality. So uh, the you had your blood, your phlegm, your yellow bile, and your black bile, all fluids that flow in your body. And the idea would be that depending on the balance of these fluids, that determined your 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 personality. So if you had too much black bile, you would be moody, anxious, pessimistic. If you were passive, careful, thoughtful, controlled, that was having a good amount of phlegm. It sounds kind of strange, but that's what they thought. Sanguine, and this is red for blood. If you had a lot of blood, you were sociable, outgoing, responsive, lively, carefree. You were a good leader. And then the yellow bile meant you were touchy, restless, aggressive, impulsive, optimistic, and act. But again, the idea is that who you were was based on your fluids. This would kind of makes you realize why when the first doctors would bleed people, because they thought they had too much blood. It was all an idea of the fluid balance, and so that was the original biological perspective of personality. Hans Eysenck, I always have trouble saying his name. Hans Eysenck brought a different approach to biological personality with his theory of the reticular activation system. The reticular activation system. You remember the reticular formation from the biology section of class? So Eysenck believed that we all have an optimal arousal level, a level at which we feel comfortable, the way he put it, comfortably engaged with the world. But it's not all the same. And that where our optimal arousal level exists can determine our personality, whether we are introverts or extroverts. And remember, arousal is something that's generated by the biochemical content of the brain, by our nervous system and neurotransmitters. What Eysenck felt was, and that this arousal level, and let's say, for example, you're the kind of person that you like to jump out of airplanes. Eysenck would say that the arousal level that you're comfortable with is very high. In fact, if your arousal level drops below that high optimal, you're not going to feel very good. And so you're going to be pushed and driven to push your arousal level up so that it matches that place where you're comfortable. And so because your brain needs your arousal level to be, let's say, 9 on a scale of 1 to 10, you're going to be an extroverted person because you're trying to push that arousal level up to get you where you want to be. If, on the other hand, you're comfortable with an arousal level at about a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, then you're not going to be jumping out of airplanes. In fact, you're going to probably go out of your way to avoid arousing situations. You're not going to be comfortable in crowds. You're not going to be comfortable going to big parties or engaging in loud conversations. You're more likely to want to stay home and read a book and be what have the personality that might be referred to as introverted. And Eysenck called this the reticular activation system theory because if you remember, the reticular formation in the brain is this section here up at the top of the brainstem that involves taking all of the input, all of the sensory input that comes into through the eyes and the ears and the skin and so forth, and then transmits it through to the cortex. And what Eysenck believed was that in this reticular formation, that this is where we have this level of input that we're comfortable with, and if we don't like a high level of arousal, if we don't like that, then the reticular formation is going to, our brain is going to try to keep that arousal down. We're going to try to do things that that doesn't generate arousal. But if we like if we like that high level, we're going to be seeking it. This is a graph that shows, according to iSync, where people are. About the first 15% of people have a, a low. Let me make sure I get this right. So think of this in terms of, obviously we all, as William James would say, we're all in the same stream. We're all dealing with the same continuum of information coming at us through the world. And so Einstein believed that for about 15% of the population, the normal stream of arousal, the normal stream of stuff coming to us from the world is way too low. And so they're going to go out and seek things that will push the arousal level higher. And these are the extroverted folks, the augmenters, the folks that will skydive and start conversations, and they're the life of the party. They may also be the people who might be more likely to try drugs and alcohol to try to augment and wake up. And for another 15%, the general level of activity in the world is above what they're comfortable with. So they're going to seek to diminish their arousal. So they're going to withdraw from all of this activity and try to quiet things down around them because they're not comfortable with it. And those are your introverts. And then 70% of the population, they're in the middle. They're generally okay with how things are. They're not necessarily looking to jump out of airplanes, or they're not necessarily, they don't really want to go shut themselves up, in the library, or in their room reading a book. And there's nothing wrong with that. Basically, what Isaac is saying is the reason that people choose to have these personality traits is this biological need to get their arousal level to the point that it's manageable. And so if the general arousal level is just too low for folks, they're going to try to push it up higher by going out and thrill seeking. If the general arousal of being in the world is too high for certain folks, they're going to try to reduce it. And so it all depends on where that comfortable arousal level in you is set. And if you think about it, you could probably determine for yourself, where's your arousal level set? Is it, are you uncomfortable with high arousal, with things that, generate adrenaline? Or are you bored with the world and you're looking to make it more exciting? This is actually from the textbook. And you can see that the personality characteristics of somebody who is introverted, quiet, reserved, passive, that means the level of arousal, the baseline of being in the world, is above what's optimal to them, so they try to keep distractions to a minimum, whereas people who the baseline level of arousal in the world is below what their optimal level is set in their brain, they're pushing out to be more outgoing, social, and dominant. So that is Eysenk's reticular activation theory. Jeffrey Gray had another interesting perspective, and his perspective was reinforcement sensitivity theory. And Gray believed that we have a behavioral activation system and a behavioral inhibition system. And you can find these in your textbook. An organism that is sensitive to rewards, in other words, you like rewards a whole lot, is more likely to learn association between behaviors that bring rewards and will seek those rewarding opportunities. And so if your brain chemistry is set up to like getting rewards, then you think about the video we watched about the kids who liked jumping off the high dive versus those that didn't. So if your brain chemistry likes those reward chemicals, then you are going to seek out opportunities to increase those reward chemicals. It sounds a little bit like conditioning. On the other hand, if your brain chemistry is more sensitive to punishers, to chemicals that make you feel bad, then you're going to learn associations between behaviors that cause those bad chemicals to get into your brain, and you're going to avoid those things. You're going to avoid those situations. And so if let's say jumping off the high dive causes more stress chemicals that your body doesn't like, then you're going to avoid situations like jumping off of the high dive. And when we're talking about chemicals, for example, like dopamine. Dopamine makes us feel good, and that sends us that, yeah, I liked that, I want to do that again message. And so that's linked to the behavioral activation system, and dopamine makes us want to, get more of whatever causes that dopamine to create. Interestingly, early encounters with warm caregivers and positive life experiences can promote growth in dopamine receptors. And so the idea there would be, if you had a very warm, positive, encouraging childhood, your brain grew more dopamine receptors, and so things that generate dopamine make you feel good, make you more likely to go do them again, so you would be more likely to be extroverted to try to get more dopamine. Serotonin also causes feelings with well-being, and individuals with less serotonin tend to have more of a negative mood. And so you're more likely to stay away from things that will drain your serotonin level. Interestingly, drugs that inhibit the reuptake of serotonin, in other words, drugs that keep more serotonin in the synaptic gap, are used to decrease negative mood and enhance your feelings of sociability. So a lot of the drugs that are out there to help people deal with depression affect serotonin. And so that's the idea of the one of the biological perspectives, that our personality is actually driven by our desire to either get the brain chemicals that make us feel good, or avoid the brain chemicals that make us feel bad. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this lecture. Two things that I want you to do. One, I would like you to try the Big Five personality test. You tried the Jung typology test last time. Try the Big Five personality test, and it is located at it's www.outofservice.com, which is an interesting URL, /Big5. I'll put this link in the assignments tab. So take the test, and then the question is, of the personality perspectives that we've looked at, which personality perspective makes the most sense to you, and why? Are our personalities driven by this unconscious psychodynamic boiler room? Are our personalities driven by the cognitive factors that we actually think about who we want to be, or are we driven by chemistry and chemicals? So that's your question. Click reply and comment, and have a great week.